So Tina, thank you so much for coming in to Maersk today, and really excited to talk to you about one of our favourite subjects, diversity and inclusion. And I really just wanted to chat to you a little bit today to talk more about why you started the Diversity Council, and to get your insights into the sort of world of diversity and inclusion, and maybe to share some of my reflections as well. So why did you start the Diversity Council?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure to discuss our favorite topic of DE&I. The Diversity Council, we're actually going, as you probably recall, 5-6 years back. And I'd been abroad for 23 years, had my career internationally, and moved back here. And was actually a little bit shocked to read the news that not that many women were in top leadership positions. And I'd actually told the whole world that in Denmark it was sort of like a birthright almost to have equal rights. So when I landed back here in the country I'm born, there were large companies like Maersk and others that were very keen to form a sort of like strategic partnership with other companies to benchmark and to see what is it actually that worked for them in terms of activities in diversity and inclusion. And someone like McKinsey came to me because they were involved in other things we did, and said that in other countries there were these types of gatherings, and then we looked internationally to see what really worked. And I thought one of the things that actually were lacking was to make sure that there was some kind of alliance where you anchor the commitment at the very top. Yes. So actually commit the CEOs, even the board levels, top management, together with people in culture and HR and D&I. So that's when we reached out to someone like you, because we already had a connection, and understood also at Maersk that this was important to you, being such a global company, to sit with other large companies. And as you know, today, 5 years later, we are more than 20 large companies and international companies as well. So you were founding partner, which made a huge difference. I truly believe that it's the SDG 17, isn't it, that you partner up to reach the goals. A lot of companies we meet today are looking at one area of diversity and inclusion and equity as well, but typically don't have time and resources and focus to sort of look at all the facets. Yes. And the intersectionality and all the other things. So as you know, gathering companies, you increase the brain power and the capacity and the budget. So the synergies is really what works, I think.
Yes, definitely. And I think for Maersk, we've definitely benefited from having that forum where we can share, where we can learn as well. And I know when we started out, we were very much looking at gender, but also looking at cultural diversity, LGBTQ+ as well. And I think the forum has expanded so much now that we can start to talk about those topics as well. And yet we still know that we haven't progressed enough in gender. And I think it's always going to be a priority for us, certainly coming from a male-dominated industry, such as the industries we work in across Maersk.
And that goes across the world.
Yes,
I mean, everybody is now looking at all the aspects of diversity, but gender equality, in order to actually just, as I know is your focus too, to just achieve balanced leadership.
Yes.
To have all the views, to be more innovative and all the rest that is already proven, all the evidence is there. I mean, we've seen that for years. So I've also seen, both in the council and beyond that, the conversation has moved very much onto, from the business case of the why. Yes. Why does diversity and inclusion matters? I know you've done a lot of those kind of also presentations. We're still doing it, but a lot of people are completely convinced. Thank God that it's important and evident for a number of reasons. And now it's very much the how, and we can also feel out there that it's also how much.
Yes.
So there's like I always say it's a perfect storm at the moment. There's like a push from all sides, right?
Yes,
both from investors and from the talents, the young generation who really are looking now for workplaces like this at Maersk, where they assume that they're coming into an inclusive, of course, and fair workplace with lots of diversity.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the research I've seen, over 60% of job seekers will look for a diverse organisation. And yet, so when we start to look at this from a STEM perspective, especially, you know, looking at science, technology, engineering and mathematics, what do you think are some of those key levers? Because you have programs like Lead the Future, where we have role models, and I, you know, we've looked at various different things around, you know, looking at bias and gender bias just in children, and we've sort of introduced a female engineer and a female captain to a group of children, and I think they were quite surprised to see women in those kind of positions. So what do you think we need to do from a societal perspective, or sort of, you know, from those early years through to the corporate environment to make a difference? Because we haven't seen those numbers move, and especially in countries such as Denmark. You know, we know in India that the percentage of female graduates in tech is much higher. So what are some of the levers, and what are you doing with Lead the Future as well to try and pull some of those levers to change that gender parity in those areas?
You're absolutely right. It's very interesting to see that India, China, there's different countries in the world where science and tech and so on is very much seen by all students of all genders as the future, and where the future jobs are. And for sure that is an important thing for all companies at the moment. The Lead the Future campaign that Maersk has been part of for a while is also, as you know, cross-industry.
Yes.
And there's no doubt that in order to actually start changing things, it's a cultural change. And as you said, it starts from the very young, that they have to look up and look at the sky of stars and sort of say, okay, it's not just these 5 things I can become a million different things.
Yes.
So the role model campaign is actually, we've seen it year on year. We've done it for 4 or 5 years now. We're also continuing it now, and eventually we will take it international, I hope. Having someone coming who's an engineer, who's a captain, someone who is in charge of R&D of 300 people in pharma. We even have the CEO of the central bank there. Standing up as women in front of students, especially female students, but also we also have boys in the room normally. So we're trying to not just talk at university level, where typically the young students have already chosen a direction. You actually need to start earlier.
Yes.
So at in our country here, gymnasiums, but sort of like, when they're teenagers. And then when they sort of see, and I think this is a big thing, as you know, for the young generation now, this whole thing about purpose.
Yes.
When they actually see that science, technology, engineering and math is a way where you can really impact the future.
Yeah.
And you can actually make a difference, and you can actually solve one of these, like all the big problems that are out there, whether it's plastic in the oceans or the climate change or famine or whatever it is.
Yes, yeah.
And when the women, the young students are seeing these female leaders, they somehow can mirror themselves. That's just how it is. You know, the saying of if you can see it, you can be it.
Yes, yeah.
So it's great to see that spark in the eyes when they meet someone and they're like, wow, shipping is like, oh, wow, I didn't think of that.
Yes,
you know?
Yeah.
So it's just about inspiring at a very early age. But I also think, if I may say, and it'd be interesting to hear what you think about that. I mean, we sometimes talk about this triple transformation, we call it. That we're working a lot in our company, in Above and Beyond. We work a lot with all the large corporates, because you really can lead the way, and then the rest of the business community typically look up to you and follow. So that's kind of the ripple effects, because we see ourselves as in essence, we see ourselves as a D&I accelerator. And what we work with, we call it, I don't know what you think about the theory, but we sort of talk about triple transformation. You can do a lot of things in corporates.
Yep.
Large organizations like yourself, you're sort of leading the way so that the rest of the business community, the smaller companies, can be inspired and follow and change. But there's only so much you can do with corporates and with the private or even public sector.
Yeah.
But in addition to the workplace, we also see that there's a societal aspect. And that's, of course, also the culture, with a lot of taboos, also like how you are a good mother and many other things.
Yeah.
But next to that, you also have it at a family level. So you can put so many new structural changes in place at sort of societal, political level.
Yes.
But if you don't have the conversation at home amongst, you know, your partner and everything else, who has the education, who is willing, the compromises that have to be made. So I really think, coming back to your thing about STEM educations, there's a huge area that the politicians actually can help make those structural changes. And I know you've been working with me and others and also trying to change that, because the educational system, there's a lot of biases there, also from teachers.
I think that's so true. I mean, I remember a book actually my son brought home from school that had Men on the Moon, and that was the title. So it was about astronauts, and I just felt, why could it just not be on the moon? Why do we need to actually put a gender on this? Because the kids in his class, they're going to aspire to want to be an astronaut, to be a scientist, or whatever whatever their dreams are. That we shouldn't be trying to put people into boxes around that age as well. So I totally agree with that, and I think on that sort of triple transformation, so we've been driving a lot of that through our ESG strategy, so environmental, social and governance. And one of the things we're doing is really trying to get the right measures and accountability within the organisation. So from an environmental perspective, obviously it's so important for a company such as Maersk, but socially as well, where we're now looking at, well, actually, what are the right measures for us around diversity, equity and inclusion? So we look at things such as engagement, but also the percentage of women that we have in the organisation at management level. And also from a nationality perspective, so we're in 130 plus countries, 180 plus nationalities in our organisation. So for us, it's really important we're able to reflect our customers at all levels. And it's so important, I think, when we're looking at some of those challenges, and we do see that the challenges are different by culture. So as you were saying, on the social perspective, we have in some times where we've seen that in order to get women into certain careers where maybe it's around shipping, etc., that there are some family taboos around that and cultural taboos, and should women work in that environment? And actually what we're seeing is we have some amazing, I sort of call them, they're the first women, the first ever to be in specific roles, and they're breaking through those barriers, which is fantastic. And some of the work we're doing around that is more on that inclusion level. So really trying to understand the culture and making sure that we're bringing the organisation with us. And I wanted to really get your views on this, actually, because I think it's one of those challenging things where we do see that people don't feel that they're included. There are certain groups that feel that they're not included in the diversity agenda, because we look at specific aspects. But one of the things we want to do is make sure that as an organisation, that everyone feels included, because it's around, the leadership, it's around being able to connect with different individuals, and everyone has a different learned experience and lived experience. So, whether you're male, female, whether you're British or Danish, that you're going to have a different lived experience and something unique to bring to the business. So what are you seeing from other organisations as well, or just in some of the trends about how we do that and how we make sure that organisations are inclusive?
Yeah, well, there's so many aspects in what you're saying there, and this is what's interesting about this topic. It is rather complex, and so many things have to happen in parallel at the same time. And I know we have discussed also that as soon as you just let go a little bit on focusing on gender and focus on something else, then the numbers change. So, well, to say it maybe in a simplified way, what we see is there's two areas that are extremely important that definitely have to work in parallel, that I know also at Maersk you've been working on for a long time, is that thing about the talent pool and making sure to strengthen, especially, but also beyond that, of course, the female talent pipeline. So that means that constant investment, and we have, as you know, because you've been part of it too, this cross-industry leadership programs for women. And I'm also getting pushback sometimes, are you like in 2022, or you're still doing leadership programs for women? However, we're seeing that is where there's a gap. So like any other strategic focus, if you are lacking software programmers in a company, and you have some, you make sure, of course, to retain them, further develop them, and you want to advance them within your organization in order to also attract new ones. So we see that, for example, as you know, these that you have a lot of also in Maersk, female leadership programs is one area that really works. And then, of course, making sure you don't have bias in recruitment and attracting all the talents out there, also the international ones, when you are such a big organization as you are. But on the other side, it's the inclusion piece. And it's fostering this inclusive culture, but also making sure, and that has kind of moved over the last, and again, also internationally, moved over the last just 5 years. I really feel strongly out there with all the organizations, whether it's in sustainable energy or shipping or auditing or all the different companies we work with, that there is really true commitment from CEOs. I mean, there's no top leader that will go out and say, of course, and say, oh, no, I'm an excluding leader. I mean, everybody knows that inclusive leadership is so important. Yeah. The next thing is, of course, what does inclusive leadership mean? But typically the top managers out there, they know. And then you have the people and culture, D&I people and so on, driving really this agenda with a lot of employee engagement. Like you also have all sorts of communities across Maersk who are doing fantastic things themselves, you know, sort of bottom up. And you have the top that's interested in, and you have all the HR business partners that are like really rallying it also. Yes. But what we see also, again, across industries is that sort of the middle management, very, very important that they don't feel excluded. Yeah. And actually, again, being inclusive is a competence, it's a discipline. And I here we have, as you know, an academy and leadership programs and all of this. It's kind of like people say, oh yeah, I'm inclusive, but actually don't know what that means. And maybe actually, could you elaborate what you're doing in terms of what you think is the key things in order to actually show up and really be inclusive? What are the things you recommend to your leaders worldwide?
So I think, I mean, the description of, you know, where companies are and where we are as well, about really getting to the different levels of the organisation, because we're a huge organisation, and I think it's about getting that leadership accountability and a leader-led agenda, which is one of our pillars that we drive at Maersk. And it's about saying, you know, you sort of start off with quite a macro view on diversity and inclusion, and you have the, you know, leaders speaking up, and you'll have your commitments and measures and all of those things in place. But actually, how do you get that individual ownership? And so it's about trying to make the agenda meaningful for everybody. And for us, it's really linking it to our business. So absolutely, yes, it's the right thing to do, without a doubt. But if we're to transform as an organisation and we want to go into, we want to build our digital muscle, we want to really build out on logistics, that means we're looking at specific talent, and we're looking for new talent, and we're also looking to develop the talent that we have as well, so that we can provide the right solutions for our customers. Now, that means that leaders need to understand that to do that, we need to engage our people, and we need to also be looking from the broadest talent group. So going out with just the usual approach to we want a job description or a job ad, and we want to make sure that actually when we go out that we can attract from the widest talent pool. So we will put measures in place about trying to get more gender parity in that talent pool. That's one thing. And sometimes our leaders will say, well, why is this? Are we only hiring women? Absolutely not. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying to do is make sure that the door is open, and so that men and women and people from different nationalities, from different backgrounds, want to come and work at Maersk. And so then we have the choice of the widest talent.
And when you make, which I think you do, you also have the concept, of course, of avoiding biases and making more neutral job applications, ads, all that. And it's so interesting to see who walks in the door. I've had the pleasure of working in a very international organization at De Beers and Bang & Olufsen abroad and so on. And you know, I work with colleagues from all over the world and learned every day. So I think this is really, even here in the Nordics, that there's a need to understand that it's only when you actually bring very diverse people together, also across, which is another aspect that we're beginning to work on also together, on ages. I mean, just something like that. And when you're talking about diversity at boards and everybody have exactly the same age and the same background, actually you can have a young tech entrepreneur that already is a multimillionaire coming in at 26. And you have to learn to actually listen to that person and what they can contribute with, right?
Exactly, and I think linking it to the business needs is so important. And so, yes, we look at bias and things like that. And I think, for me, my personal view is you can manage your biases. You can mitigate some of that bias. But for me, I've had years and years of certain background, cultural aspects that have shaped my biases. So it takes time and it takes motivation to do that. But by linking it to the business needs, that's where it's important. So, for example, most businesses want to innovate, they want to transform. So in order to do that, if you need to innovate, you need to have different perspectives sitting at the table. So if you want different perspectives at the table, then you've got to be able to increase diversity, and diversity in its widest form. Then if you want to be able to create a space where people feel that they can speak up, because if you want that diversity in the room, then people need to be able to feel safe to be able to challenge, to be able to bring new perspectives, new ideas and new ways of doing things. And that you need to be able to create psychological safety in order to do that. And so leaders need to learn some of these different aspects. That psychological safety means not shooting down the idea that came up, or not shooting down someone because they've made a mistake, but actually learning and saying, okay, so we can make mistakes in this organisation. What did we learn from it, and how do we move on quickly? And how do we then gain further knowledge from that? And then the third piece is about, okay, so now you've got these different perspectives in the room. Are you willing to listen? And are you willing to say that actually there's someone in this room who's got a better idea than I have? Whether you're a leader or whatever position you have, and that's the inclusion piece. It's about saying, okay, I hear you, and actually that's a great idea, why don't we do it? So you have to have all of these different aspects in place because it's good for business. So it's not just about fitting a certain quota, criteria, targets, etc. It's actually good for business.
And to that point where you're saying there's, when we're training leaders in unconscious bias, it's actually very simple things when it comes out, because we all know it's the brain, it's biology. So,
yes.
So you actually can't, a lot of people say, oh yeah, we want to avoid or remove bias. And that we know is just physically almost impossible, but you need to be aware of them. So
yes.
Even those little details of doing a tour de table, asking everybody around the table so that the introvert is also heard, but especially yes. when we talk future and STEM, that's another aspect of diversity, right? You have the extrovert leaders and you have the introvert. Making sure that everybody's heard, and as you say, when they actually speak up, they're not interrupted, that the opinions are heard. And again, that's also something we hear in gender.
Yes.
It's an international sort of anecdote, right, from Madame Albright and everyone else, saying that it's not really, you don't really feel when you're sometimes the only one in the room, if we're talking about a female leader reaching the top, and then you're saying something, and then 5 minutes later, a man around the table says the same thing, and then everybody thinks it's an amazing idea, and she just said it. So again, that's actually also that bias again, and also out of all the different biases, I think the conforming bias is really, really also important when making decisions. That if, I don't know if you've tried it, I've even tried it myself, sitting at a board meeting and you come prepared, and it's about, I was new at this board, and you sit with budgets, and of course you're very well prepared, and you look through and you have to approve the budget, so you're finding like all the details and potentially some questions, mistakes, and then you enter and you have these at that case it was 6 men, and they were all completely aligned that this was a perfect budget and all was good. And if you're the only one then
yes.
finding 3 areas you thought were not correct, then you need to of course speak up and feel that you have the courage and you have a reason to be at that table. So that's a voice that always has to be heard. And if you have a company where you do not allow people to come with input, ideas, or find those mistakes, I mean, that's a huge problem, I think.
Just from a return on investment perspective, if you start to think about the fact that you're maybe a table of 10 people, if 8 of those voices don't feel heard, and you're paying them to be at that table, exactly. then it just exactly. doesn't make good business sense. So exactly. I totally agree. We have the big Nordic conference coming up, our Womenomics conference, yes. and we're thrilled that you and Maersk have been supporting that for, it's the 8th year now. And that is also focusing on women's impact on the global economy, and of course the wider focus on diversity, equity and inclusion.
tell me what you feel is important in terms of that agenda, and also live streaming it to your colleagues and so on, why you have supported this conference for so many years.
So I think for us, the Womenomics, just in the title, it's again going to my last point about, it makes good business sense. And I think for us, that's why we've supported it. I think it's so important to be able to have a platform to discuss these important issues. And also I think, we've always said anyway, haven't we, around it's like we really want more men to come and attend this, because a lot of the women who are there, they will talk very specifically around, what are some of the challenges, but also around some of the innovations. We have business women there talking, and I always remember one particular one who was talking about innovation, and it was just so fascinating to hear like some of the knowledge in that room. And I think that needs to be shared on a much broader platform. So for this year especially, I'm extremely excited because we can live stream this out to our wider audience across Maersk. So
and 70% of our speakers are men,
and
male CEOs
great.
And Harvard professors and all of that, because you need to include everyone. You cannot be women talking about women to women. This is a business, a strategic, critical issue,
isn't it? And gender is all many different aspects. So, so for us, being able to stream it across our organisation this year is fantastic. And I think there's so much more now with virtual meetings and everything, the way that we're working, that it's great that we can do that.
It's also about building a community, right? For us, my purpose of this conference has always been to build this global community of change agents, because we can't do these things alone, right?
And having speakers from around the world, I think that's really helped as well. And I know we have one of our own speakers who's Shireen, who's going to be talking about growth and another important area around venture capitalism, where again we see that there is a big gender disparity. But it's important from a business perspective that is recognised, but then also what is it that we can do as companies, and where a company's heading in that growth area as well. So I think that there's so many elements for that conference from a business perspective, but also it has that gender lens, and I think that gives it so much more complexity as well, and interest for us as an organisation. So I'm glad that we can continue to support it, but even super happy that it's going to be streamed this year. So some of our employees and colleagues across the world can tap in at different time zones as well to listen.
Yeah, looking forward. It's soon. Yes. The other thing I see a lot, you just mentioned earlier, the ESGs. What I'm really encouraged about and feel very optimistic about is that we're in the business community. I have an NGO also called Sisterhood, but this is business. We are consultancy, you are a large business. So from the point of view of money talks, and all the investors out there now, whether that is BlackRock or the big banks or the pension funds, also here in the Nordics, the oil fund in Norway and so on, they are all now going in to actually say that if you do not have the social aspect of the ESGs, diversity in your top leadership, gender, but also all the other aspects, LGBTQ person, all of that. If you don't have all your ducks in a row, they're simply not going to invest in you.
Yeah.
And I think that's extremely powerful. You see that too, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And I think I remember studying finance and accounting, and actually social responsibility accounting was one of the modules I studied, and it was a few years ago. And so I always used to think, well, I was so interested in it as a subject and a topic, and I thought, well, this is the future of organisations, but it has amazed me that it's taken this amount of time, but the progress in the last year has just accelerated so much. And it's a continuous conversation for our team, just in HR, looking at diversity and inclusion, looking at supplier diversity, ESG, inclusive trade. I mean, there's so many aspects to it. So I really see that as an area that's growing. But I also wonder as well, Tine, could you share your thoughts on the future? So from an investor's perspective, we've spoken around that, and actually we've seen progress there, which is fantastic. Having that pressure from investors is great on companies. But what do you see for some of the future trends, or where we need to move in the future to really make a change?
Various aspects. I think one of the most important ones is actually linking that view that the investment community, business community, but investment community have on this topic, and then coming back to accountability. So there's been a nice to have kind of attitude also amongst top leaders. Some are really engaging in the agenda, like your own CEO is, which is wonderful, walking the talk, which is extremely important. And I think with social media and everything else, I mean, that is another key trend. You really need to know today as a top leader your way around DE&I and what it means to your employees, but also very much, of course, and that's also what Womenomics is about, it's all the aspects.
Yes.
It's also the marketplace. So if you're a big pension company, one thing is actually saying, you know, this is the way we will invest our billions, but then people instantly say, what about your own house? You know, so you also need to make sure that is in order. So there's all these different facets, and there is a pushback instantly, especially on social media, if you're not walking the talk. Yes. So as a top leader, you really need to prepare yourself and know what this is about. Your employees do, and the marketplace does. Then there's also this whole thing, which Coca-Cola, for example, who's also at the conference, as you know, to take D&I upstream, downstream. Yes. I know it's also something I think at Maersk you're looking at now. So is there a way that you actually can go and motivate people to change? I won't say force change, but inspire people to change across the board with all the points you have across supply chain and so on. And then, of course, I think the individual level, I mean, we can all make a difference. I have 3 daughters, you know, I have a niece, I have a nephew, you know, the way we bring up our children, the way we talk to everyone in the street, people coming up, I know that happens to both of us, you know, can you be a mentor, will you have a coffee? At the moment, I'm very busy in terms of having coffees, but you know, always trying, you know, at an individual level, and also the allyship, that's so important. It's a word that is used a lot abroad. It's not so known, I think, here in Denmark. We'll also be talking about that at the conference. But making sure when you're in a room and you see or hear something that is not okay, that you actually voice it. And even more importantly, if there's a minority who's not in the room, but something is being said, even just as a joke, that I'm sure the person wouldn't find funny, it's really important to stand up and say, actually, in this company, this is not part of our value set and culture. Yes. I'm sure you didn't mean it, probably, but it's not acceptable. Yeah. Someone has to speak up. It's about being an upstander, isn't it, really? I think that's the term we've been using. And I think just on those points as well, having one of the recent things we did, and this came from our employee network, actually, which was our rainbow container. And now we have several rainbow containers, and we have so many customers who are interested because they also want to take a stand. And it is about being an upstander to say, this is what we stand for. And it's fantastic when you have that shared value with your customers, with your suppliers, with your partners as well, as to what you can do. So, and this is what I think, happy to say this also on camera, Maersk has been very brave and bold, and I think we both agree in D&I sometimes you just got to experiment, you just got to try things. And doing something like this across the globe, where there are countries where, you know, opinions are different, different cultures. I think it's very brave, but it makes a difference because then it's seen and then it's heard. And I think that's really how we all impact change. Thank you so much, Tine. It's been really great to chat to you as always. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks.